Now, this is the story of Luciano and his evil twin Kawasaki H1 that started life. He got the bike from Turbo Steve, and there is a story connected to him getting the bike that I want Turbo Steve to somehow share with us. And I'll interview him for that because his bike had an amazing life before Luciano got it. But when he got it from Turbo Steve, it needed so much work. It needed, as an example, it needed engine cases, cylinders, a whole exhaust system, and on and on and on. So what we decided to do, Luciano was going to do all the mechanical work, and I did the original painting, and we made a green set of bodywork, side covers, tail section, and tank. Because we originally intended to make this an evil twin, and then he wanted to get another set of bodywork and make it that he could have a blue H1 and a green H1. Well, you'll see in the video how this evolved, and it's something I've done for many of my bikes, is I've had them, I call them evil twins. It's something I came up with to describe having a bike with two sets of bodywork, and you can have it as a certain one look like a West Cooley bike or an evil twin Ferrari, but it's, you don't have two bikes. It just looks like two bikes at some point in time, and I may do that with the MT-09 at some future time. But for right now, this is the story of the H1. Now, the original parts that came with the bike, and I'm going to put a lot of this in fast forward, I did the paintwork of the green set of bodywork. Luciano decided when he did the blue that he wanted to paint the blue himself and do all the bodywork himself just to save me work, which I appreciate. And when he gave me the tank this is for the evil twin set of bodywork, everything was already in blue. And we had already made the decals up. And so the biggest part of this whole job was going to be to get the trim to match how Kawasaki put it on an original paint job, and get the coloring right. And this is a tank that had no Bondo in it, so it was a minimum amount of work taking care of that. And the tail section was in nice shape, and we had the decals already made. So in the very beginning of this job, it was starting to look like, well, this was not going to be nothing too complicated. And if I remember right, the Turbo Steve printed some of these decals. Joe Roselli printed some. I'm not sure who printed the ones we used, but it doesn't matter. We had plenty of decals. That was the bottom line. And when you print decals, always print more than you really need. Anyway, the first step on this job, since Luciano had sprayed it with a large automotive spray gun, there was a little bit of orange peel on it. I wanted to start the job off. I didn't want to start the job and have a real an issue with the trim being uneven. So I took my time, took 2000 grit paper and block sanded everything back down flat. Now, block sanding this paint turned out to be a great choice because we hadn't decided on the color trim yet, but because we were going to do it silver, silver shows every single little flaw in the paint, and it was a great investment in time getting this done. And certainly once you get it to this point, keeping track of the time is pointless because I want to get it perfect. I want every little flaw out of the paint. And when this is going back together and it's buffed out and all the clear is on, I don't want to see a little mistake come shining through. So this took a lot more time than I thought. 2000 grit paper, sanding the whole tank, block sand it nice and flat. Because if you don't do that, you really run the risk that somewhere down the road it's going to bite you. Now, the next step is going to be, we wanted to copy that pattern for the tank trim. Now, if you're new to doing this kind of work, this is one of the things that looks real easy when it's done. When you go to do it, and to get that stripe to look like it's the factory stripe, there's a lot of give and take. I made several of these patterns. I eyeballed it, I measured from a center line. I did every possible thing I could to get this right and get them even on both sides, because on this bike, that tank stripe is one of the defining things of the bike, and it wraps around the back of the tank in such a way that if it's a little bit crooked, you're going to see it right away. Now, the seat kind of hides it, But in reality, you're going to see it. That's my point all the time is you think you're not going to see things, but you always wind up when you're done, oh, why didn't I do that better? Now, using the fine line 3M tape, and I always recommend if you're going to do this kind of work, use new tape. When tape gets a year or two old, a lot of times what happens, tape gets stickier as it gets old, and it tends to pull up paint. And since Luciano had painted the blue, I didn't know how well prepared the tank was, whether it had a good coat of etch primer on it or not. I wasn't sure, but we certainly started out with a nice flat coat of blue, and now getting this even, that from every angle that you look at it, it's even. And this is the thing, it just looks easier than it really is until you go to do it. You know, it's that same thing. Everybody's a great parent until they have children. Once you do this, you respect this kind of work. Now, if I had painted the bike from the very beginning, the first thing I would have done, the very first thing, would be to paint the white stripe. Luciano painted the tank. So what this means is there's going to be 10 times the amount of backmasking to get that stripe white in the very end. That's the stripe, where that tape is now. And so on every video I've ever shown, I always emphasize paint the smallest area first. Well, in this case, didn't have much of a choice, but it's something I can't work around. It's just extra labor. But getting that stripe laid out, and whenever it's a curve, some of that 3M tape doesn't bend around corners real nice. The fine line tape wrinkles, you got to eyeball up a lot of it. And always, always, good tip, heat the tape when you go to take it off. Now, getting that stripe in there, that is really a critical part of this job. And and I know what a lot of people are thinking is, why don't you just go get the decal from somebody and just glue the decal on? Yeah, you know, just think about it. With all the curves in this tank, even if you did choose to do that, getting it on straight and with any of the stick-on things, getting it on the first time, if it's not on straight the first time, sometime you're done for the day. Anyway, getting it to that point, backmasking it with the way Walpray shared with us years ago. Thank you, Walpray. Backmasking with tin foil. But all of this is extra work. Doing the imprint thing that I show on all the videos so you can get this done. Just look at how much extra work you have to do here because that white wasn't painted first. If that white was painted first, and that's the key thing, get that off any video of mine that you watch. Paint the small color first. So now you have the stripe exposed. You're ready to spray it. But up to this point, there's probably been many hours of extra work. First off, laying out the stripe. And then now to have to re-backmask it twice, it's a lot of extra work. Anyway, without beating a dead horse here. Now, I wanted to get that stripe white, 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 white. So I painted several coats of white. I was not cheap with the white. The reason is I know a lot of times what will happen when you try to minimize painting white over blue. When you're all done with the job and you put the clear on, it really comes out with a tint of blue in it. The blue bleeds through the white, and especially pink. If you paint over red with white, it tends to be pink at some future time. So I really wanted that to be white, 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 as white as I could possibly make it. And then that had to dry overnight before I pulled off. I always like to let the paint dry overnight before I pull off the backmasking. And anytime I pull backmasking, use the heat gun whenever, or hair dryer or whatever. And if that is a tip worth its weight in gold, in this case, we didn't pull up any paint. But if that paint was not bonded to the metal the way it should be with self-etching primer, and we don't know what was under the self-etching primer even, so I don't know. The only way you really know is if you take a tank and you have it sandblasted. You're down to bare metal, and then you go home and in 30 minutes you got a coat of self-etching primer on it. Then you've really stacked the deck in your favor. When you're painting over somebody else's paint or some other paint that you don't even know who painted it, or the factory paint, that's all unknown quantities. And that's why I really am careful about using the heat before you pull up the tape, always. So from this point on, painting the silver, you just pull out the backmasking from the silver. You leave the rest of the backmasking on. Then to do any other part of this, you just got to pay. It's like a puzzle. Where the backmasking can come off. In this case, we wanted to leave that all of the blue that's backmasked, but I wanted to have the silver exposed. So each paint job is just a little different, and every one of them, it's always a good idea to figure out, like, do it in your mind ahead of time to make sure you don't make yourself extra work. And these jobs tend to be labor intensive enough without figuring some way to make it harder than it has to be. Now again, silver. This silver, actually all silver, shows every flaw way more than any other color. So if you think something's perfect and you paint it silver, a lot of times it's disappointing. And you look at it the next day and you go, uh-oh, I didn't sand that out. But anyway, I know that from modeling many, many years. In modeling, you paint the whole model silver just to find the flaws when you're sanding it out. So again, I want everything in between coats to dry overnight. I put this aside to dry overnight before I pull up and change the backmasking on it. I don't want to take any chances at all. Now, just looking at pulling up the backmasking, and I'm not belaboring this any more than I have to, but using the hairdryer really stacks the deck in your favor. Now, once we get that blue stripe up, we're going to be ready and to put the decals on. And we had made the decals for the first set of body work we did. We didn't have to go through another labor-intensive thing of making and designing on a computer the decals. And in this case, I know he already had extra ones. And what we did, we wound up taking from probably 18 or 20 of them. We took the two best ones we had. But I do remember that there was something funky about the decals when we went to do it. But in the end, it all did work out. Now, I prefer the water slide decals to the stickers that you peel off and stick on, because I can coat them with clear, with fewer coats of clear, and get them to lay flat, that when you run your hand over it, you can't feel it. But like with everything, if you have a lot of them, and then you can just pick the best two, sometimes because they're inkjet printed, there's little spots that aren't perfect on it. We did get a good set of decals out of this, though. And installing them, of course, can be an adventure. And sometimes, I don't know why, I don't know how. I think it has to do with the quality and the age of the decal paper. John Pathia seems to have found a good source for the paper, but not every one we've used has been real good. Some of them have been prone to have little air bubbles in them. Some of them have been perfect. So, and I have some of both on all my bikes that I've done the restoration on. But getting them, the nice thing about this is you can move them around and get them lined up just perfect. Unlike when you have one of the ones that you pick the back, peel the back off, and then you don't get to move them around much. But you can do that by water installing them too, and there's other tricks. But to me, it's just the easiest thing and the nicest when it's totally done and they're installed and buffed out, and you can run your hand over it and not feel where the decals or the paint edges are. And on this bike, I wanted that clear to be perfect. So I really spent my time here getting nice paint edges and the decals right where I wanted them. Now, every bike is an adventure unto itself, and painting the clear on this, and when we do a lot of this work, we do in really cold weather, that means the paint takes a long time to dry. That works out to your advantage in a lot of ways, because you get a good adhesion, and it'll usually lay down and be nice and shiny right from the get-go. But that doesn't mean you don't have to sand it in between coats, and there's just no real absolute answer that makes it all, that there's no work involved. You can minimize the work, but in the end, it's still a labor of love. And this one, and whenever I'm working on a tank, I know if you don't put enough clear on at some point in time, you may want to wet sand it again and buff it, and now you don't have enough clear on. It's just easier to get it all on right while you're doing this. You have the tank right out on the paint table. So, and the paint for this job, the 4-to-1 clear, the temperature was really cold. I do remember that. And I remember thinking how nice that paint looked when it was all cleared out. Wow, did that look nice. Now, once that's sanded, it'll get dull again. And we'll get it block sanded back down. And then when the rest of the clear goes on there, you won't be able to feel the paint lines. You won't be able to feel the decals. It'll really be nice. So it's really a big labor of love, but there's a lot of rewards along the way when you start to see how nice something looks. And you know, in this case, this is not everybody in the world has an H1 in their collection. They're rare, they're hard to find, and having two sets of bodywork, so in essence, you really do have two of them in your collection. And that's what's nice about Evil Twins. You don't have to go register another bike and rebuild another motor. And in this case, Luciano, I ought to share this. Luciano got the bike. It needed crankcases, it needed cylinders, it needed a seat, it needed a whole exhaust. He put the labor of love into the mechanical parts of this, and I thought it's only fair that I put the same amount of time into the cosmetic parts of it like this. And boy, when that was drying out in the sun, wow, did it look good. Now, the wet sanding, usually you would do this between coats or before the last coat. This just becomes time consuming. And if you're very fussy and you get it all block sanded out, it's flat, it's dull, and it's ready for that final coat of clear. And now the trick is always you wait for a day that the wind isn't blowing too badly. And I always try to get this done early in the morning before the wind kicks up. But you can see already the wind is already kicking up. Hey, sometimes you just can't win. But the idea of the wind not blowing, it's a big advantage. You don't get as much dust in the paint that you have to wet sand out and buff out in the end. But this laid down, the combination of it being cold and that paint, I let it dry for 3 days in the garage. It just laid down perfectly. It buffed out like glass. It just was absolutely flawless when he picked it up. And when we went to the first meetup, Turbo Steve got to see the bike that used to be his, and before the restoration and after, and I'm sure he was impressed with what a nice job Luciano did. And he put a $500 seat on this bike. That seat was $500, among other things. And he's got at least enough cylinders and cases to make one more and maybe two engines. And two sets of bodywork. So I know he loves these bikes as I do. I had two of them. I had two H1s and an H2. And I know he raced these. So he's got a little more intimate knowledge. Now, I got to ride this bike when it was done. We went 106, up and down 106. And this bike does not handle like the original ones did. He put work into the suspension. He put new shocks. I know he did stuff with the forks and the head bearing. He got it. It's like a brand new bike. And it absolutely worth every penny. And I was so glad that at the end of it, I didn't skimp on my end of it either. He put the labor of love into the mechanical stuff. I got the cosmetic that I'm happy with it. And I'm so glad that at the end, he was very happy with it too. Now, my humble collection, and Luciano's is a little bit different. I have one bike from every 10-year period. His is a lot more eclectic. He has more sport-oriented bikes. I just want one from every 10-year period that I've been involved in motorcycling. And I like them to be evil twins, to be honest. I think most of them are, in fact. And having a bike that I can, like the West Cooley bike, I can change the bodywork out. Or this is my 750, I can put the red bodywork on it. Or anything. When you can have two bikes for the price of one, it's pretty good. Anyway, I hope you did enjoy this video. And we enjoy doing these videos. I enjoy editing them. And thanks so much for watching.